sub-amendment to the sub-amendment. She is highlighting a point. Many Canadians have been very clear that the cuts to evening broadcasting from the CBC are something that they oppose. It has made Canadians' lives and an ability to access vital information poor, right? And I would say that when we're talking about strengthening our public broadcaster, it has to be with deliverables, and that means restoring local and regional journalism, including local evening broadcasts. And I would say, if we're looking for where to get the money from, I would say ban those executive bonuses. Canadians deserve the news in their regions. Let's prioritize that. Let's strengthen the CBC and the Radio-Canada by ensuring that they have the resources to do that critical broadcasting work.
Before resuming debate, I believe the Honourable Minister of Women and Gender Equality is standing on a point of order.
Thank you so much. Yes, and on a point of order, Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to ensuring every woman has the right to make informed decisions about her body. Therefore, pursuant to Standing Order 83-1, I would like to table in both official languages a notice of ways and means motion which contains our plan to require more transparency from charities who use deceptive tactics to push women away from making their own reproductive decisions. Pursuant to Standing Order 83-2, I would ask that an order of the day be designated for the consideration of this ways and means motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank the Honourable Member for that. Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Kings Hants.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always a privilege to be able to have the opportunity to stand in this place and bring the voice and the perspective of my constituents from the beautiful riding of Kings Hants, just next door to you, Mr. Speaker. And I can't help but remark on the point of order that was just made by the Minister for Women and Diversity about the importance of making sure proper access to abortion services, making sure proper access for women to be able to make that choice themselves. Obviously, yeah, absolutely, it does deserve a round of applause. Thank you to the Minister for her work, and to make sure that charities are not trying to undo or limit that ability for women to make that choice. I do think that this is going to be an important element in the days ahead. We see what's happening south of our border on these questions. I know when I speak to women in my constituency, they want to make sure that they have the ability to make that choice for themselves, not to have other people make that choice for them. But, Mr. Speaker, we are here on a concurrence report. What does that mean, Mr. Speaker? That means that the opposition has chosen to use more time in this House to bring forward a committee report that was already passed and duly passed at committee stage and requires a government response. In this particular instance, I'm actually pleased to have the opportunity to explain and to give some context to my Conservative colleagues about the concern that I have about the direction they may want to take on public broadcasting. But I would be remiss if I didn't use at least a minute or two to explain to Canadians the concern I've had about the fact that the procedural elements of this House, that the ability for this House to get work done, has been completely gummed up by the Conservatives for closing on 3 weeks now. There is before this House a question of privilege. Questions of privilege, Mr. Speaker, are undoubtedly important. They matter, and there have been 2 of them raised, as according to the Speaker. Now, the Speaker has been very clear that in relation to the question of privilege that is before this House right now, that it should be referred to committee. But what has happened, Mr. Speaker, is there has not been an ability to actually have that vote called, because, of course, our procedural rules allow on questions of privilege every single And what they've done, they have continued to move amendments and sub-amendments to continue to restart that clock, not on a genuine concern about the question of privilege, but to tie up the affairs and the resources of this House so that other business cannot actually happen. I think that is shameful, Mr. Speaker, particularly because the House Leader has been very clear that we would welcome a vote and ability to actually litigate this matter and be able to move it forward. So at some point, I think Canadians are going to have to ask, when will the Conservative Party actually allow this House to get back to the legitimate business of government and the things that matter most crucially to Canadians. I'm not saying the question of privilege, Mr. Speaker, is not important. I'm not saying the issues surrounding it don't matter. But there's a clear consensus in this House to actually be able to move forward. But instead of that, the Conservatives are using procedural tactics to delay the ability for perhaps the government to introduce a fall economic statement, the ability to discuss other things that actually matter to Canadians. So we're going on 3 weeks, Mr. Speaker. I hope at some point during my question time here today, when I'm asked, one of my Conservative colleagues will tell me when we can actually get on with it, when we can go. But guess what? It does allow me to be able to focus on my constituents and the needs at home, so I do welcome that, and I will welcome the opportunity to continue to be at home and focused on the needs for my constituents. So thank you very much to the Conservatives in the same breath as well. But today's aspect is a question around a House report. It relates to executive compensation awarded by Catherine Tate, the CBC president. I think it's important to remind Canadians, Mr. Speaker, that agency, our public broadcaster in this country, of course, accountable to Parliament because of the money that is provided on an annual basis, around about $1 billion, but is independent of government. And of course, you wouldn't know that, would you, Mr. Speaker? Because at times, when you hear the opposition stand up, you would suggest that it is a quote-unquote, I've heard the words, propaganda arm of the government. That is dangerous language, Mr. Speaker, because it is undermining not only public broadcasting in this country. The leader of the official opposition has gone so far to suggest that CTV is quote-unquote a propaganda arm for the Prime Minister. This is the kind of playbook that we're seeing by right-wing parties and leaders around the world, that is to try to undermine the credibility of media institutions across the country. The media, this idea that we can't believe what journalists report. And I want to take a moment, Mr. Speaker, to give my perspective on this. When I read the National Post, I inherently understand that it has more of a center-right bend. I don't stand here in this place and say what I read in the National Post is untrue, or it's out to just attack the government, or it's a attack dog for the member from Carleton. No, I don't say that, because I'm not trying to undermine journalism integrity in this country. When I read the Globe and Mail, I would say that's right down the middle, Mr. Speaker. Others may see it as right-wing, left-wing, but I don't believe what the Globe and Mail is saying in this country is factually untrue, even if it may have a journalistic bias. Same with our public broadcaster. Again, the Conservatives will make concerns about the integrity of that institution. They call into question. The irony in all of this, though, Mr. Speaker, is if you actually watch the social media channels of the members of the official opposition, of course, they love to cherry pick when there's an actual story critical of the government. And of course, that's the job of our public broadcaster, is to be critical, to provide information. So in one breath, they say it's the propaganda arm of the Prime Minister, you know, some type of North Korean type of dynamic here in this country. They gaslight and fire up Canadians, but yet they'll use the content from our public broadcaster when it suits their narrative. In my neck of the woods, Mr. Speaker, we call that hypocrisy. And it is disingenuous to the debates that we need to have in this place. And I'm going to get to the debate in this place, which, of course, the text of this motion deals with the compensation that the CBC has provided to executives and other members of the team. Do I think that that was ill-suited in today's context? Absolutely, I do. When the CBC CEO is announcing job cuts to our public broadcaster, I think there needs to be more context. I think it is unconscionable. I think the member from Fleetwood used that word. In an environment where you are laying off employees of your team and your organization, and you are choosing to compensate at the same time, usually that's the moment when you tell your executive leadership team, we're proud of your work, but right now we're in an environment where we maybe just can't provide that because it sends the wrong message as we lay people off. It's just not the right course. And so I do agree with that motion of the text. I think it was unfortunate. Here's the thing, though, Mr. Speaker. This is the dynamic as well. You have to be, and you ought to be careful as a government, because I've heard the member from, I think it's Saskatoon Grasswoods, talk about the idea that the government should have intervened. If we truly want an independent broadcaster, a public broadcaster, government ought to be careful about intervening in those cases. And so, again, I hear the Conservatives talking about the idea that the public broadcaster is too tied to the agenda of the government, but yet then they want the government to intervene directly in a way that actually we want our independent broadcaster to be truly independent. I think there's also a legitimate question about talent maintaining talent in these environments. There are people that have requisite skill sets. It's a competitive environment out there in the media landscape, and I do think it's an important question to ask about the remuneration that matters to ensure that we can have quality journalists, quality management to be able to ensure our public broadcaster stays competitive in the media landscape. So I want to address that. But this opportunity has arisen where it gives me more opportunity to speak to public broadcasting across the country and why it matters. Mr. Speaker, you and I represent rural ridings in Nova Scotia. I can guarantee when you go out and want to make an announcement or maybe talk about, I know maybe you don't do it as often as you may like, but you know the government has done some good things in West Nova. We want to get out and talk about that, or initiatives you want to do as an MP. Boy, it's not easy to find an actual media outlet, is it, in West Nova or Kings Hants? Because the environment we're in right now is we've actually seen a shrinking of local media in this country. And that is extremely challenging because we're living in an environment, whether or not you're a member of Parliament or you're a citizen who is trying to find credible information about what's happening in the world, more and more where we're getting our information is from these things, our cell phones. And you know what? There's a power to having a computer in your hand and ability to find information all around the world, but it also, we are in a world of algorithms and social media. And when I talk to young people, when I go into high schools in my riding, and I say, where do you get your news? Because when I went to Hants East Rural High, there used to be papers laid out on the library at the where we were. You could actually go and on a free block, you could read the news. What's going on in the world? Of course, that's when we had flip phones, Mr. Speaker. We didn't have the whole internet at our access, at our fingertips. But it is concerning because a lot of students, when you ask them, where do you get your news? TikTok. I get it from Snap Stories or Snapchat. Geez, that tells me how old I'm feeling in this place at 33, Mr. Speaker. But Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, social media. And guess what? You know, it's been a very interesting exercise as I talk to young people, young women and young men. Who comes up a lot on your social media? Joe Rogan, Elon Musk. These are the type, even amongst young women, you can see the algorithms that once you go see one thing or two things, you start seeing it and you get in echo chambers. And Mr. Speaker, whether or not it's individuals that I think we could clearly classify as kind of being far right, or if it was even on the other side and it was influencers that would be on the far left, it does a disservice to our society to be in a situation where you don't get a breadth and width of information to be able to help inform your opinion. You're in an echo chamber, you're seeing the same things. You might start to believe that everything you're seeing is absolutely true. I think it's important to have critical thought and that we have individuals, trusted journalism that can actually help provide and help us understand the context of what we're dealing with. I want to talk about CBC in the context of the regions, Mr. Speaker. Atlantic Canada is, I think, perhaps the best example of where the public broadcaster has an important presence and a long and storied programs like CBC Land and Sea, Mr. Speaker. I don't know how often you've watched it, but I know many of my constituents. It is an informative documentary series that talks about our communities that, frankly, global CTV, no other public broadcast or private broadcaster is going to deliver that element of Canadian content. I think about This Hour has 22 minutes, proudly still in Halifax. It's editorial control, still in Halifax. I think about Family Friends, someone like Kendall Now, who does important work there. I've been in the studio. It's being driven by Canadian actors to provide a little bit of comedic relief. I think we could use more of it here in Ottawa, a little bit more levity in this place. But it is important because it is Canadian, true Canadian content being developed in the regions. I think of Son of Critch. Again, Newfoundland types of shows. I think about the CBC Evening News in Prince Edward Island, which is by far the leading example of our public broadcaster of having a large market share on that evening news where Islanders will tune in to watch the CBC. But CBC is not above reproach in the sense that we cannot suggest that there does not have to be reform. In fact, I am of the view that although public broadcasting is we need to maintain it, and it scares the heck out of me that the opposition wants to cut it in a world of algorithms and declining local media. They want to get rid of trusted journalism. That is concerning. But let's not pretend that they don't need a bit of a boot in the butt, Mr. Speaker. I think that that is important. Couple things that I would note based on the conversations I've had over the last 10 years. Increasingly, CBC and its editorial control is centralized in Toronto. I love my good friends from Toronto. I love my members of Parliament of all sides that reside there. Great city. But I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, that is what our big private-held media companies are doing. They are centralizing their editorial content out of the middle of the country. I can tell you there is a vastly different perspective in regional Canada and in rural Canada. And so we need to be able to make sure that there are resources not in our biggest city of the country that may not resemble or reflect what is happening in rural Canada. We need to make sure, and that was the entire emphasis of our public broadcaster, Mr. Speaker, was to go cover the areas of the country where the private broadcasters wouldn't go because, frankly, there wasn't a business case to do it. So why is it that under CBC, under the leadership, they have increasingly put their resources in the middle of the country, frankly, where it's already being served quite well by private broadcasters? That is the exact opposite. I'll give you one example. There was CBC executives putting out to the regions on the headquarters in downtown cities across the country. You need to sell those locations and you're going to move a little bit further out to the suburbs. We can't afford those properties in downtown. But guess what? They didn't take the Kool-Aid in Toronto, did they, Mr. Speaker? It's right in the downtown. If you're going to say that in Halifax, you ought to be doing it in Toronto. Let's put CBC headquarters out in the suburban areas if that's what you think is good for St. John's, for Halifax, for Charlottetown and other areas. So I think if we are going to maintain the confidence of a public broadcaster in this country, we need to make sure that first and foremost they are serving the regions where there is not the private broadcasting to actually meet the needs. Because I can tell you, when I go to make announcements in my own writing, maybe I get lucky with a saltwire journalist that will actually show up and put into the paper, which matters, although there's declining readership. Certainly on television, it's a lucky day, it's a cold day, and I better not use HE double hockey sticks, Mr. Speaker, that we will actually see CTV and Global. And I appreciate the journalists that do come. They tell important stories, but it's few and far between because the private broadcasters don't want to drive an hour down to the valley, Mr. Speaker, and they sure as heck don't want to drive down to beautiful West Nova, far away from Halifax. But CBC and Radio Canada, they'll show up, and it's important because they're telling the stories that matter. So my message, and how much time do I have left, Mr. Speaker? About 5, 6 minutes? 4 or 5? You'll give me 5. I'm a good Nova Scotian. What I'll say is we got to get back to editorial capacity in the regions, resources in the region. We have to focus on true Canadian content, Mr. Speaker. I mentioned CBC Land and Sea. This hour has 22 minutes. Other documentaries that are focused on Canadian content. I'm sorry, we don't need Canadian Family Feud. We don't need Americanized content that we put a lipstick on the pig and call it Canadian. That's not what the public, and that's where I think at times the public broadcaster has lost its way. But I do want to take the opportunity to talk about, in my last 4 minutes here, the concern I have about the opposition cutting public broadcasting. So, Mr. Speaker, we've established, I think, that in many cases it is our public broadcaster, whether on television, certainly on radio, that provides really important news and content information. There's many places where we have essentially media deserts where the private sector is not, either doesn't have a business model to do it, has not been able to find a way that the public broadcaster matters for news and information. I have many constituents in my riding that believe in the important work of this. And we have the Conservatives saying that they would cut it. They would cut this in an era of social media, of algorithms. I don't understand why, but I want to go back to the bigger narrative here, Mr. Speaker. It's not just the CBC they want to cut. They want to denigrate media and journalism across the board. And I asked the question in the House a few weeks ago, what news agency do the Conservatives trust? And they're not going to try to denigrate. Because when I watch Vashi Capello taking a hard stance on a cabinet minister in this government, I don't think that CTV is a propaganda arm for the government. I don't think it's appropriate for the member from Carleton to stand in this place and try to attack CEOs with his parliamentary privilege to downgrade Canadian stock of companies that Canadians actually have this in their retirement plan. That is irresponsible leadership, Mr. Speaker. It is a symptomatic element of where the Conservative Party has ended up. Are there good, honourable members on the other side that I believe in? Absolutely. But under the leadership of the member from Carleton, the Conservative Party does not have the true progressive and moderate conservative views that I think have resonated in this country for a long time, Mr. Speaker. George Nallen, Joe Clark, Scott Bryson, guess what they all have in common? They represented the good people of King's Hants as true progressive conservatives. And that party does not exist anymore. My message to my constituents is very clear, that when you look at the modern Conservative Party of today, and I'll say this, the member from Carleton, I was not a huge fan of Stephen Harper. I didn't agree with everything he did, but I'll tell you, he looks like a heck of a statesman compared to the member from Carleton. My God, bring back Harper over the guy from Carleton. The member from Carleton makes Stephen Harper look like an absolute statesman. And I'll tell you, that scares a heck of a lot of people in my riding, Mr. Speaker. I'm getting a rise out of them now. It scares a lot of people in my riding because they didn't like Harper. Remember, Harper was the guy that called Atlantic Canada a culture of defeat. We were not pleased with Harper at the time. And guess what? My constituents go, my God, that guy from Carleton, he's even scarier. He's further down the line, and he's trumpeting the same playbook that we're seeing more and more out of the United States from the Republican Party, or at least its presidential nominee. So my message is this, Mr. Speaker. We have to find a way to make sure that we broadcasting in this country, that we can maintain our public broadcasters that are telling important stories, that are making sure information is getting to residents across the country, particularly in areas where the private media companies will not go. The Conservative agenda to cut the CBC, to cut our public broadcaster, with no conversation about reform, is absolutely irresponsible. And the last thing, to my colleagues from Quebec, the idea that we're going to cut CBC and it's not going to have an impact on Radio Canada, is absolument...
It's absolutely nuts.
That they're not going to have it. Quebecers know the importance of Radio Canada. They ought to be careful, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to 10 minutes of good questions from my colleagues.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Maskinongé. Well, I'd like to thank the colleague from King's Hants for his speech. Listening to his specific attacks, we know that he's getting ready for the next election. But on the issues, Mr. Speaker, I get along very well with my colleague across the way. And I enjoyed the end of his speech where he insisted on the importance of Radio-Canada, the French CBC. And I'd like to hear him say what he thinks about the idea that when there were cuts at CBC and Radio-Canada, the cuts were 50-50 between Anglophone and Francophone Radio-Canada, even though Radio-Canada, the French side, is making quite a profit and funds the English side. Does he not see some injustice there? The Honourable Member for King's Hants. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for that question from my honourable colleague. Now, listen, I think that public broadcasting for English Canada outside of Quebec is very important, but it's also very important that there be public broadcasting in Quebec and for Francophone communities outside of Quebec. And more important, in your subscription, Mr. Speaker, your riding, Mr. Speaker, the presence of Radio-Canada is crucial for the population there. And when the Conservatives look to cutting CBC's resources, it's absolutely going to have an impact on the level of service that Radio-Canada offers in the French language, but also for all French-speaking Canadians. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech, and I'd like to congratulate him for the quality of his French. Answering the block's question in French, it's really impressive, and I congratulate him for doing that. I listened very closely to his speech, and in his speech he mentioned the fact that the Globe and Mail is a serious newspaper and that it had good information that's always verified. Now, Mr. Speaker, when the SNC-Lavalin scandal came out, and the tragedy, the democratic tragedy where the Prime Minister got involved in a legal process for partisan reasons, when the Globe and Mail revealed what had happened in the Jody Wilson-Raybould affair, the Prime Minister of Canada, the current Liberal leader, so his boss, said publicly, his first comment after that headline in the Globe and Mail was that everything that's in the Globe and Mail is false. And yet it was true. So who in this House attacks the credibility of serious media? The Honourable Member for King's Hants. Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, in terms of SNC-Lavalin, I'm a little bit surprised that my honourable colleague didn't think about the importance of protecting jobs in Quebec. Absolutely, it's necessary to prosecute executives in the SNC-Lavalin situation. But if the decision by the former Justice Minister had been fair, had been done, rather, there would have been a direct impact on Quebec jobs in Canada. Second, when it comes to the Prime Minister's comments on the Globe and Mail story, well, there's a difference between the story and the comments and the facts, the reporting, and a general impression, as we see from the Honourable Member for Carleton, that there's a certain bias.
It's between saying the story is false and saying that an agency or journalists are out to get you and that they can't be trusted at all. So an honourable member can disagree with reporting from a certain journalist on a certain story, but when you start to lather through this idea that all of it is problematic and the journalists have a bias and that it's a propaganda arm, that is a wholly different standard, and he knows it.
In comments, the Honourable Member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Speaker, and thank you to the member for his speech today. First of all, I agree with so much of what the member has said today. It is highly problematic to hear the Conservatives once again bringing forward short-sighted misinformation around how to best move forward. You know, some things I just don't understand. For example, you know, we hear the leader of the Conservative Party talking about cutting and defunding CBC, yet at the same time, wait, not Radio-Canada, when they're using the same infrastructure, there's laws around this. It's just completely confusing and providing misinformation. I appreciate that the member spoke about the impacts and importance for those in rural communities to have access to CBC. I know also CBC has stations that are in, I think, 8 Indigenous languages now. This is vital for Canadians, and we know the majority of Canadians support public broadcasting. But now my question to my colleague is, you know, we know that we need to make sure that we're supporting CBC and public broadcasting to be the best and so that Canadians have the confidence that they need, as said by the member. What can the Liberals do differently to help ensure that Canadians have that confidence and that public broadcasting is supported to the best of its capacity? Thank you.
The Honourable Member for King's Hants.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A lot in that question. I do appreciate the sentiment. First of all, the Minister of Heritage has committed to be releasing guiding principles and the things that the government would like to see in terms of coverage in rural Canada. I think obviously depending on the plan and the contents therein that are going to be coming, that may mean an increase in funding, that may mean an examination of how best we can support our public broadcaster to reform and to meet the needs of modern Canada today. Again, my speech did not say that CBC is beyond reproach. I think it is a fundamental, public broadcasting is fundamental in this country, but again, reform is also necessary. I would completely agree with her sentiment about the reckless nature of the Conservatives talking about cutting public broadcasting in an environment where we are being subjugated to algorithms, from increasing social media, from disinformation, not just from necessarily content users, but from foreign states. It's been very clear that foreign states are trying to use social media platforms to sow discontent in democracies. The last thing I want to say, Mr. Speaker, and I said it in my remarks, I find it ironic that the Conservatives will say and run down our public broadcaster, but when it suits their narrative, I see on their social media stories from the public broadcaster that are critical of the government. Again, I repeat, in my neck of the woods, that's called complete hypocrisy.
Questions and comments. And the Honourable Member for Waterloo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to thank the member for his comments and just actually taking us through quite a fruitful and thoughtful debate on this matter. I know that there's other issues that we should be debating, but there is some merit to this motion that's been presented by the Conservative Party of Canada. The comment I would make, and in my inbox and constituents of the riding of Waterloo wholeheartedly support a public broadcaster. They recognize that we can do better, that the CBC, but they do fear the Conservative approach of just cutting programs and services that are available to Canadians. Just after the member spoke, I received an email from a constituent reminding us that, similarly, Prime Minister Stephen Harper, like this leader of the Conservative Party, puts Conservatives first. I would believe that most Canadians, myself included, we would put Canadians first. I'm born and raised in this community, proud to be born and raised in the region of Waterloo. And for me, Canadians, Canada is my priority and my focus. I would ask the member, what is the importance of supporting a public broadcaster? I would ask the member, how does it benefit constituents within his riding of Waterloo? And I would ask the member, if Conservatives had it their way, what would their idea of a public broadcaster be? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Kings Hands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll correct the record. The honourable member from Waterloo tried to give me the privilege and distinction of representing the good people of Waterloo. No, that's her job, and she does an excellent job of it. I'm pleased to represent the good people of Kings Hands. What I would say to the question is we are in an environment right now where there's been a decline of local journalism. We are in an environment right now where foreign state governments are trying to sow discontent in democracies by driving misinformation online. And increasingly, in an environment where we don't have access to trusted journalism, our public broadcaster is extremely important for providing that information. The Conservatives are planning to cut our public broadcaster in this country at a time that rural and regional Canada needs it even more. Many of the constituents on the opposition benches, the members of Parliament on the opposition benches, have constituents in areas where there would be very little to no local media at all. It is extremely important to maintain that public broadcaster, but it's important to focus on reform too. Let's not suggest that the CBC has been perfect. I think now is a great opportunity to focus on how we reform our public broadcaster to meet the needs all across the country, including re-engaging communities very strongly in Western Canada, where the presence is not where it needs to be. But it does not help when the opposition party continues to denigrate our public broadcaster. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to respond.
I know we're getting close to the end of it, but just make sure that people can keep their questions and comments as short as possible so everyone can get to participate. Resuming debate, the honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon in about 15 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's interesting to hear a Liberal member after 9 years realize that they've now also broken the CBC. They broke housing. They've broken the criminal justice system. You sort of go down the list of what they've broken over the last several years, including when the Prime Minister broke the English language by inventing a word called brokenist. Which was a treat for all of us to listen to just last week. But what I want what came out of the committee is this, that given the job cuts announced at CBC Radio Canada for the year 2024, that it would be inappropriate for the CBC to grant bonuses to the executive members. Because they broke the CBC so badly with terrible appointments and terrible management, a committee had to take the unprecedented step of telling the CBC not to give out bonuses when they've performed so poorly. It's really actually unheard of. This has not happened in the history of the CBC. So you have to wonder, how did this government so incompetently manage the CBC through the people they've appointed to run it? They've done an absolutely abysmal job. These Liberals have run the CBC into the ground. So viewership at the CBC has collapsed by 50% since 2018. Think about that, 50%. Now, if you were in any kind of other environment, if you had declined your goal production in hockey by 50%, I'm guessing your team wouldn't be giving you a bonus. I mean, I've never run an NHL team, but I can't imagine a player going into the owner and saying, I scored 40 goals last year. This year I scored 20. I just want to talk about my bonuses. It just wouldn't happen. But because these Liberals are just so incompetent with everything, and everyone now thinks they can do whatever they want. So the CBC executives, because there's really no one running the ship over there, they don't know what's going on, they're incompetent, their incompetence is spreading to every department. These people thought, let me think about this for a second. So viewership is down by 50%. We failed to meet 79% of our performance targets. let me think what we should do about that. Oh, hey, wait, I've got an idea. Let's cut 800 employees and give ourselves bonuses. I mean, this is the madness that's going on at the CBC, and it can only happen under this absolutely corrupt, bankrupt of ideas Liberal government. Like the rot, as we often say, Mr. Speaker, a fish rots from the head down, and let me tell you, the rot from this government is spreading everywhere, and it spreads so badly that Catherine Tate at the CBC thought that this was a good idea. I can just see it now, right? They call everybody into the boardroom, need to pitch some ideas. Viewership's down 50%. We didn't meet 79% of our KPIs. Let's go around the table. Let's figure out what the solution to this. We got to get things back on track. What if we cut like 800 employees? Oh, yes, I like that. What if we gave out $3.8 million in bonuses? Oh, yes, I like that. That's exactly the direction we need to go. And then these Liberals stand here, do nothing, and defend it. It's offensive to average Canadians how the CBC is behaving. And so the committee had to take the unprecedented step of saying the CBC shouldn't be paying out bonuses while laying off people. Not the government. They didn't say anything. They just said, oh, whatever, like they do on most files, sort of out of touch, asleep at the switch, making a mess of everything. So they made a mess of this. And I want to go on just a little bit more. So Catherine Tate gets her salaries between $468,000 and $551,000 a year. That's a pretty good wage. I think most Canadians would be really happy to make a wage like that. In fact, they'd be happy to make a fifth of that. So as the performance of the CBC is going into the tank, right, she decides that bonuses are great, and the bonuses can be up to 28%. So, okay, I've tanked viewership. We haven't met any of our KPIs, missed 79% of them. You know what I think will really fix things up? I'm going to give myself a $154,000 bonus. Like, you really can't make this stuff up. Any average Canadian seeing this would say, no, that's got to be a joke. This must be a Beaverton article or something like that. Like, no corporation would behave this way, except if you're being run by a really incompetent Liberal government where, they appoint people to the Green Slush Fund who just paid themselves and their companies whatever they wanted. There's now an RCMP investigation going on. And as I said, a fish rots from the head down. So this corporation, Crown Corporation, sees that Crown Corporation, making it rain by sending their money to all their buddies' companies, and they say, yeah, well, I think we want to get in on that action. Let's give ourselves some gigantic bonuses. It's absolutely reprehensible conduct by a Crown Corporation that is running itself into the ground. And what the CBC did is they dished out $18.4 million in bonuses to non-union staff, and wait for this, $3.3 million in bonuses to 45 executives. That's more than $73,000 each. And then they said, you know what, Mr. Speaker, we've given ourselves this wonderful Christmas present, these gigantic bonuses. Let's give some employees at the CBC a Christmas bonus as well. They sent pink slips to 800 employees. That's what they decided was a good thing to do as they made it rain for themselves. So this is why a House of Commons committee took the unprecedented step to say that this has to stop. Now, you would think that if there was a decent minister over there or a decent prime minister over there, they would have put a stop to that, but no, absolutely not. Just like they didn't put a stop to all the corruption at the Green Slush Fund. They let it go on for years. Despite all the warnings, all the questions at committee, they said these people can run amok and do whatever they want. And that has spread. It's now spread to the CBC. So then we get to, Where does the CBC go? They realize, oh, we missed 79% of our KPIs and people are questioning our bonuses. Anybody have any ideas what we should do? Should we try and actually do content that people want? Should we, make sure our local affiliates are getting some coverage? No. Someone put up their hand and said, what if we just change the KPIs so we all reach them? Then we can keep getting our bonuses. Again, you cannot make this up. When they realize that they can't meet any of their own KPIs and they still want to make it rain for themselves, they just change the KPIs. Now, why would they do that? I go back again to this. A fish rots from the head down. The corruption that this government has engaged in for the last 9 years has spread out all over the place, and people just feel like we can do whatever, and I'll quote my former member, whatever the HE double hockey sticks we want to do. And so that's what happened. So the committee had to get into it and say that they have absolutely had enough. If you look at the CBC itself, the bonuses alone have cost taxpayers $132 million since 2015. Think about that, $132 million. All the while, they're missing all of their performance metrics. This is a corporation that has completely lost its moral compass in how it's dealing with people. Imagine sending out layoff notices to 800 employees just before Christmas after you gave yourself bonuses. I mean, it is the epitome of disgusting. If anything, they should have been taking care of those workers opposed to making it rain for themselves with these absolutely exorbitant bonuses. But it didn't happen. And there was no condemnation from the Liberals, right? The Prime Minister didn't say this is absolutely unacceptable, they should reverse this decision.
There's a point of order from the honourable member from Bow River.
Point of order. When will this debate end?
End of the debate will be at 1:14. So we got about 11 minutes, or less than 11 minutes. I'm counting wrong. That's completely wrong. That's 6 minutes. The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, for 1,450 CBC staffers are taking home six-figure salaries. Since 2015, the number of CBC employees taking over six-figure salaries has spiked by 231%. Again, all the while with absolutely declining viewership, not meeting any of their KPIs, and giving themselves these lavish and gigantic bonuses. And Catherine Tate has not ruled out taking more bonuses. It's really incredible. In the face of seeing all this, a responsible CEO would say, you know what? We've made some serious mistakes. We are running this corporation into the ground. I'm going to turn this thing around, and the first thing that's going to happen is we're not going to take any bonuses until the ship gets going in the right direction. But that's not what's happening. I mean, in the real world, that's what's happened. Actually, in the real world, all these executives would lose their jobs for this terrible performance. But in the Liberal world, what they do is they give themselves gigantic bonuses, pat themselves on the back, and then lay off the workers. That is the record of this Liberal government with the CBC, which is again why we're back here today. Now, I've heard members from the Liberal government say, how dare we take up valuable House time to discuss this? I actually think Canadians want to know what they've done to the CBC, how they've run it into the ground. Now, I understand when you've got a Prime Minister who says he admires the basic dictatorship of China, that he doesn't want debate in the House of Commons. That all tracks. And I'm sorry it's so inconvenient for Liberal members to have to try and get up and pathetically defend how they've run the CBC for the last 9 years. I agree, it's a hardship. Sorry, tough luck, guys. You actually have to stand up and defend your terrible record. But they don't want to. So they say things like they're taking up House time. You know what? Parliament's here for a reason. It's to debate issues. And if that's inconvenient for them, Maybe they should if they admire China's basic dictatorship so much. Maybe there's somewhere they could go and be dictators. There's lots of countries around the world that they could move to where there's basic dictatorships, China being one of them. So we're going to debate this because it's important to Canadians to expose what they've done to the CBC, what the people at the CBC are doing to the workers at CBC, and we're not going to stop. And they can cry about it, Mr. Speaker, all that they want. The facts are this. They cannot defend their management of the CBC. They cannot defend the bonuses that the CBC has given it to itself. They cannot defend that the CBC awarded themselves these gigantic bonuses and then tried to lay off 800 workers. They can't defend that viewership at the CBC is down 50%. They can't defend that they haven't met 79% of the CBC's own KPIs and then gave themselves bonuses. They can't defend the fact that when they realized how outrageous it was to give themselves bonuses while missing 79% of their KPIs, that they just changed the KPIs, because they learned from the best. They learned from a corrupt Liberal government that says, just do whatever you want, everything will be fine. And that's how the CBC is being run under this Liberal government. Now, Mr. Speaker, I would like to conclude with this. I move, seconded by the member for Battleford. Thank you. No, this is en français. Mr. Sorry.
Rather than let that happen, I'm just going to the member for Dufferin and Caledon.
Seconded by the member for Battle River Crowfoot that the amendment be amended. A, by adding immediately after the word including the following. How the Liberal threat to cut CBC funding led to hundreds of CBC Radio Canada job cuts, and B, by adding the following at the end. That provided it be a further instruction to the committee that A, that it report its findings to the House no later than December 17th, 2024. B, that during this study, the following witnesses be ordered to appear for no less than 2 hours each: Catherine Tate and Marie-Philippe Bouchard. And C, the Minister of Canadian Heritage be ordered to appear for at least 1 hour. And D, that in addition to the witnesses mentioned in paragraph B, it hear at least 3 hours of additional expert testimony. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
A point of order from the honourable member for Waterloo.
Monsieur le Président, je sais que les conservateurs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the Conservatives don't want it to speak in both official languages. They would prefer to speak only English. But has this been received in both official languages? Can we get it in French, please? Thank you.
Je pense que c'est reçu maintenant.
I think it has been received in both official languages and printed.
So on va regarder de proche.
So we will look into that.
Mr. Seebeck,
Mr. Seebeck, seconded by Mr. Courig, moves the following amendment: that the amendment have added after the word specifically the following: how the Liberal threat to reduce funding led to the removal of hundreds of jobs at CBC Radio-Canada, and the addition of the following: that the committee report its conclusions to the House on December 17th, 2024 at the latest, and B, that over the course of the study, the following witnesses appear for at least 2 hours each: Catherine Tate and Marie-Philippe Bouchard, and C, to have the Minister of Canadian Heritage appear as a witness for at least an hour. D, in addition to the above-mentioned witnesses, to hear for at least 3 hours from experts. This sub-amendment is in order.
So we're out of time.
And we're out of time. It's my duty to interrupt the proceedings at this time and put forth with the question on the motion now before the House. The question is as follows. La question est la suivante. Monsieur Waugh, appuyé par Monsieur Couric.
Mr. Waugh, seconded by Mr. Couric, moves that the 8th report of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage, presented on Tuesday, December 12th, 2023, be concurred in.
Recommittal, Mr. Lamoureux, seconded by Ms. Scrow, moves the following amendment, that the motion be amended by deleting all of the words after the word that and substituting the following. Quote, the 8th report of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage, presented on Tuesday, December 12, 2023, be now not concurred in, but that it be recommitted to the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage for further consideration, provided that it be an instruction to the committee to study the consequences of defunding the CBC and Radio-Canada, including the effects on smaller communities, as promised by the Leader of the Official Opposition. Right there. Mr. Seabee, seconded by Mr. Couric, move the following sub-amendment, that the amendment be amended by adding the immediately after the words including the following led the hundreds of CBC Radio-Canada job cuts, and B, by adding the following at the end, quote, provided that it be further instruction to the committee, A, that it reports its findings to the House no later than December 17, 2024. B, that during the study, the following witnesses be ordered to appear for no less than 2 hours each. I, Catherine Tate, and Marie-Philippe Bouchard. And C, the Minister of Canadian Heritage be ordered to appear for at least 1 hour. And D, that in addition to the witnesses mentioned in paragraph B, it hear at least 3 hours of additional expert testimony. If a member participating in person wishes that the sub-amendment be carried or carried on division, or if a member of a recognized party participating in person wishes to request a recorded division, I invite them now to rise and indicate it to the chair. The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On this very important issue, I would ask for a recorded vote.
So, pursuing to Standing Order 45, the division stands deferred until later this day at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions. La Chambre va maintenant poursuivre.
The House will now proceed to routine proceedings.
Motions. Going to presenting of petitions. The honourable member for Toronto Danforth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I am presenting a petition that's been organized by Maddie's Place. They're an organization that provides support and advocacy for homeless pets. I'm submitting a petition that has been signed by people, but there was actually also a petition that had been signed by companion animals in our community. They're asking for recognition of an animal's sentience because animals do feel joy, pain, fear. They have feelings, and they deserve to have their welfare better protected. So I want to thank Maddie's Place for all of their advocacy and for organizing this petition. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions, présentation de pétition. I have the honourable member for Peace River Westlock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to present a petition today signed by Canadians from across the country. They want to draw the attention to the House of Commons to ensure that Canadians have the right to be protected against discrimination. Canadians can and do feel political discrimination, and it's a fundamental to the Canadian right to be politically active and vocal, and it's in the best interest of Canadian democracy to protect public debate and exchange of differing ideas. The folks that have signed this petition are in support of Bill C-257 that seeks to add the protection of political discrimination to the Canadian Human Rights Act. They call on the House of Commons to adopt this bill quickly and to defend the rights of Canadians to peacefully express their political opinions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting on petitions, the honourable member for Courtney Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, it's an honour to table a petition, e-petition 5109, signed by 1,239 signatories from the West Coast. They highlight that there are significant risks to hikers, aviators, and mariners in the Strait of Juan de Fuca in British Columbia, and that the discretion and interventions of the lighthouse keepers along this coastline have resulted in the rescue of many stranded and injured individuals, which would not be possible through automation. And, Mr. Speaker, that Fisheries and Oceans Canada didn't consult with local communities, mariners, union representatives, or First Nations prior to announcing the destaffing of the Pachina and Karmana lighthouses on the west coast of Vancouver Island. So they're calling on the federal government to, in the future, Mr. Speaker, consult with relevant stakeholders and First Nations regarding the impacts of the destaffing, to conduct an independent cost and safety assessment of both the lighthouses and come back with a plan to move forward to reinstate those lighthouses that they closed, to work with union representatives, Mr. Speaker, and consult Labour, as was promised in the past, Mr. Speaker, and consider alternative actions to preserve the safety of the lighthouse keepers without destaffing their stations. Mr. Speaker, Conservatives and Liberals have abandoned coastal people and continue to close lighthouses, and the constituents are demanding action.
Order, this petitions after all. Presenting of petitions, Présentation de pétition, the honourable member for Sanders Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of members of my constituency, and it's an issue that I can share without indicating my own views. It's an experience I share with many constituents, and it comes up in every single town hall meeting. Constituents in this petition are pointing to the family doctor shortage. They're pointing to the fact that nearly 5 million Canadians don't have access to their own healthcare provider. And they're asking that this government and this House assembled work with provinces and territories and find a fair and holistic solution for the quite critical emergency that we do not have access across Canada to a reliable primary health provider. And again, the statistic in the petition is 4.8 million Canadians who lack a family doctor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting the petitions, Présentation de pétition, the honourable member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure to rise on behalf of the residents of Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou. I present today 2 petitions. The first petition is from Canadians who wish to support Bill C-257, who wish to have discrimination, the definition of discrimination expanded to include political belief and activity as an enumerated ground of discrimination. The second petition I rise on, Mr. Speaker, signed by 102 people, and that petition, Mr. Speaker, is in reference to the poverty that a number of senior citizens are experiencing, and call on the Minister of Finance specifically to provide Canadians aged seniors 65 and above a livable pension above the poverty line. Thank you.
Presenting of petitions, the honourable member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to table a petition submitted by Canadian firefighters addressing an urgent issue impacting the health and safety of firefighters across Canada. This petition, sponsored by the Burnaby, calls for immediate action to ban per and polyfluoroalkyl substances in firefighter gear and firefighting foam. Mr. Speaker, PFAS are man-made chemicals resistant to heat, water, and oil, but their durability comes at a significant cost. Scientific evidence links these substances to severe health risks, including cancer, putting firefighters who are already facing hazardous conditions at greater risk. Research shows that PFAS can accumulate in the body, leading to serious health issues. And alarmingly, Mr. Speaker, firefighters face a higher cancer risk than the general population. We must mitigate these risks by regulating what we can control in their working conditions. Several countries have restricted PFAS use. Canada must follow suit. Our firefighters deserve gear free from toxic chemicals. Mr. Speaker, let us protect those who risk their lives for us. Thank you for providing me the space to present this petition.
Presenting of petitions, the honourable member for Haldimand Norfolk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to present a petition that has been signed by Canadians across this country and also by residents of Haldimand, Norfolk. These petitioners believe that the government should recognize that Canadians can and do suffer from political discrimination, and that Canadians should be rightfully protected from such discrimination in recognition of their rights to be politically active and vocal. These petitioners believe that it is important to protect public debate and the open exchange of ideas if we are to uphold democracy in Canada. As such, they are calling upon this House of Commons to support Bill C-257, which seeks to add protection from discrimination on the basis of political belief or activity to the Canadian Human Rights Act, and to defend the rights of all Canadians to peacefully express their political opinions.
presenting petitions, Présentation Petition, the Honourable Member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It does seem some members during petitions have ventured into expressing their own personal opinions on subjects. I think it's important to remind members to be studiously careful to only share the petitioner's views and not their own personal views. With that in mind, Speaker, I am tabling a petition that I received from my constituents, which asks the House to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Petitioners observe that after 8 years, it's clear that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost, the crime, or the corruption. Further, petitioners note that this failed Prime Minister and his failed NDP Liberal government have increased the cost of everything and failed to take responsibility for their failures. And I'm just reading here, Mr. Speaker, petitioners are also saying that crime, chaos, drugs, and disorder are filling our streets due to the failed policies of this Prime Minister and his NDP Liberal government. So, Mr. Speaker, without at all sharing my own views on the subject, I want to note that petitioners are asking the House to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Petitioners further are asking for an immediate
I think a point of order from the Parliamentary Secretary, Government House Leader.
Appreciate the efforts that his campaign manager went in the wording of the petition, Mr. Speaker, but member would know that you're not supposed to be reading a petition. Just in a very short way, highlight the essence of the petition.
Yeah, I want to thank the Honourable Member for that, and it just seems like we went offside there when our friend from Courtney Alberni went on his presentation too. So just a reminder to summarize the petitions as best as we possibly can, so we can present as many petitions during the time allotted for us. The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do want to assure members that I was as surprised as anyone when this petition was sent to my office. But I am but a servant of the people in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, and if my constituents want me to petition the House to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime, I can assure all honourable members that I will, regardless of my own personal views on that subject. As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, in addition to asking the House to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime, petitioners would like an immediate non-confidence vote in this, quote, failed NDP Liberal government, and to bring about a carbon tax election.
Ooh, I like it.
In which case Canadians will be able to vote to end the carbon tax everywhere and for good. So I do commend this petition on axing the tax, building the homes, fixing the budget, and stopping the crime to the consideration of the House. And I would encourage members in the future to follow my example in avoiding the statement of a personal opinion when they table a petition. Mr. Speaker, the next petition that I'm tabling is in support of a private member's bill that I have tabled in the House. It's Bill C-257, an important bill according to petitioners anyways, who say that Canadians have a right to be protected against discrimination, that Canadians can and do face political discrimination. Petitioners note that it is a fundamental right to be politically active and that discrimination on the basis of political views can limit people's ability to be actively involved in the political conversation. Bill C-257 would add political belief and activity as prohibited grounds of discrimination within the Canadian Human Rights Act. Petitioners ask the House to support Bill C-257, which bans discrimination on the basis of political belief or activity, and want to see the House act to defend the rights of Canadians to peacefully express their political opinions. Next, Mr. Speaker, I'm tabling a petition that raises concerns about a 2021 election platform commitment from the Liberal Party to politicize charitable status. In that election platform, Liberals proposed to apply political criteria to the charitable status definition and to deny charitable status to organizations who disagree with the Liberal Party's position with respect to abortion. Petitioners note that this would jeopardize the charitable status of hospitals, houses of worship, schools, homeless shelters, and other charitable organizations who, for reasons of conscience, take the position that they do on this issue. Petitioners note as well that this would be similar to the values test previously applied by this government to worthy applicants under the Canada Summer Jobs Program. They note that charitable status determinations should be made in a politically neutral way that reflects in valuation of the charitable activities of the organization, not of the personal convictions or values of those who run the organization. Therefore, petitioners want to see the House protect and preserve the application of charitable status rules on a politically and ideologically neutral basis without discrimination and to affirm the right of Canadians to freedom of expression. Next, Mr. Speaker, I am tabling a petition respecting concerns about religious freedom in India. Petitioners draw attention to findings of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, reporting that various actors have sought to establish a kind of explicit religious nationalism within India, contrary to India's secular and pluralistic foundations, and that this has posed a grave threat to India's religious minorities. Petitioners highlight a concerning increase in incidents targeting Christians in India. They also draw attention to threats to the Dalit community and the Muslim community specifically. Therefore, petitioners ask the House to ensure that any discussions or negotiations with India involve clear human rights provisions. Petitioners want to see sanctions against individuals who are guilty of extremist violence against religious minorities, as well as incitement, and also to promote mutually respectful and beneficial human rights dialogue in this case. Mr. Speaker, the next petition that I'm tabling is regarding human rights in Hong Kong and applicable immigration provisions. Petitioners note how many democracy activists in Hong Kong have been subject to arbitrary, politicized sentences, some of them under the national security law, but there have been many cases in which offenses not under the national security law have nonetheless been used to target people that are involved in legitimate democracy advocacy. And that this creates problems when those individuals might be applying for immigration to Canada, that they might be excluded on the basis of criminality even though they have not committed any crimes, have simply been involved in pro-democracy, pro-freedom protests. Petitioners therefore want to see the Government of Canada recognize the politicization of the judiciary in Hong Kong and its impact on the legitimacy and validity of criminal convictions. They want to see affirmation that national security law offenses will be considered irrelevant and invalid in relation to prospective immigration to Canada. They further want to see a mechanism whereby Hong Kong people with pro-democracy movement-related convictions not under the national security law could also be deemed admissible to Canada, notwithstanding the criminality provisions. And they want to see Canada work with other like-minded states to have similar such provisions. So I'll commend all of these petitions to the consideration of my colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions on the order paper? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask that all questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Orders of the day.
Orders of the day, ordre du jour. Resuming consideration of a privilege motion concerning a failure to produce documents pertaining to Sustainable Development Technology Canada and on the sub-amendment of Mr. Muse.
There's 4 minutes remaining in questions and comments. We already had one round of questions, so I guess we'll do a second round in the 4 minutes remaining for us. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to pick up on the issue of foreign interference, not to surprise anyone, because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, time and time again, Conservatives are quiet. They come up with bogus rationales. The bottom line is that the leader of the Conservative Party is putting his self-interest and the Conservative Party ahead of the national interest, what's in the best interest of Canadians. He's doing that by refusing to get the security clearance. There's all sorts of issues and concerns in regards to foreign interference. Why will the leader of the Conservative Party not get that clearance? Is there something in his background? Can the member clearly give an indication to the House, and through the House to Canadians, why does the current leader of the Conservative Party not want to get the security clearance, and explain to us what he might be hiding?
The member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
I would caution that member, first of all, to I think it's beneath honourable members to cast wildly aspersions. But the reality is, as stated by that vehement Conservative supporter, former leader of the NDP, Thomas Mulcair, this is strictly a political ploy by the Prime Minister in order to gag the leader of the opposition from criticizing this government. The fact that they would utilize foreign interference for political reasons is disgusting.
Question et commentaires, questions and comments. The honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, just to follow up on the comment by my Conservative colleague, is that we've heard from experts, Mr. Speaker, that have said that it won't prohibit the leader from being able to speak on this issue. But the fact of the matter is, he says that his leader would be gagged. So if that's the case, why has his leader been silent? If his leader has all this freedom that he supposedly needs and requires to hold government to account, why isn't he using that freedom? Why has he been absolutely deafening silent when it comes to Indian interference in our government and possibly in his own political party? Like our leader said, he needs to put Canada ahead of politics and ahead of party.
For Northumberland, Peterborough South.
It's no surprising that the NDP come running to the Liberals' rescue whenever they need help. The reality is, as Thomas Mulcair said, that member's former leader, this is nothing but a political ploy, and I'll end it by what the leader said. Name the names!
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Peace River Westlock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable colleague for his great speech on the topic. What we are debating today is the privilege of this place, the documents that we need to hand over to the RCMP to do the investigation on a fund of over $400 million that has gone missing or has been allocated to companies in a severe conflict of interest. This is liberal corruption at its height. The sponsorship scandal has nothing on this level. I'm just wondering if the member has any more comments that he'd like to share about this horrendous scandal that is going on called the Green Slush Fund.
In the remaining 30 seconds, the honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you very much to the member for his excellent question. Yes, and he's right that the sponsorship scandal was a paltry $40 million compared to the $400 million that is the SDTC or the Green Slush Fund. And it's no surprising that the NDP are coming to the Liberals' defense once again in order to support and to enable their corruption, as has been the case in this 9-year NDP Liberal government.
Reprise du débat.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I begin my detailed comments on the subject that's before us today, I would like to remind this House what the Prime Minister said when he came to power in 2015 with his pretension of bringing something new to the House of Commons. In 2015, the Prime Minister, when he came to power, he came in on a wave of new hope, the dream Prime Minister for Canadians. I think we all remember that. He came in here, and he really presented himself like a saint. Perfection personified, say that we were going to be, entering a new era. And he said, listen, I'm going to do things the right way for Canada and for Canadians. And, it didn't take very long. Speaker, before he fell back into old liberal habits, but with just that much more, 10 or 20 times more. We've lost count since then of the number of liberal scandals. But what was very clear is that they put in place systems to make liberal insiders richer, and we've seen examples of that. of many insiders who've benefited from liberal largesse and from taxpayers' money. Somebody earlier mentioned the sponsorship scandal from back in the day. That was $40 million, that scandal. And that was one scandal which led to the end of the Liberal government of the day and the coming to power of the Conservatives, because the people of Canada were just completely fed up after having had to go through that scandal. But if you look at what we've gone through for the last 9 years, by comparison, the sponsorship scandal was peanuts compared to what we've seen over the last 9 years. And unfortunately, we would say that it looks like people have just gotten used to it. Now we have a $400 million scandal in front of us, but so many billions have been burned through over the last 9 years that 400 million, people are saying, well, what's $400 million? That's not so bad. We're talking about $400 million. That's 40% of $1 billion. And today, $1 billion is what $1 million was 50 years ago. This is a huge amount of money. And here, once again, if we go back to what the Prime Minister promised when he came to power, he said, I'm going to do good things for the environment. We're really going to change the way we deal with the environment here. And we have this Green Fund, which, instead of helping the environment, helped well-connected Liberal insiders. That's what happened, Mr. Speaker. And this is the scandal. We're not inventing this. The Conservative Party hasn't invented this scandal. This is proven. The facts are there. And we're being told by the Liberals, listen, why? Why are the Conservatives not giving up on this? Why are they talking about this day after day? Well, what should we do? Should we stop and say, oh, well, listen, your friend's got $400 million. Oh, whatever. It's just taxpayer money. Who cares? No, that's not how it works, Mr. Speaker. That's not how it works. The Green Fund, or more specifically the SDTC issue, Mr. Speaker, I'll remind you that the Auditor General has determined that this fund turned into a slush fund for Liberal insiders. And it was indicated that $392 million were given in inappropriate contracts. The Auditor General also found that this green slush fund gave $58 million to 10 ineligible projects, which in several cases showed no impact on the environment and no development of green technology. So $392 million for projects where members of the Board of Directors were in a conflict of interest. The Auditor General clearly indicated that responsibility for this scandal falls on this Liberal government, which did not give sufficient oversight to these contracts which were given out to Liberal insiders. And you, Mr. Speaker, indicated that the government violated an order of the House which required that the government provide the documents to the police so that they could undertake a criminal investigation. Last week, in the National Post, there was a summary of all of this, and Mr. Speaker, I'll boost what the National Post journalist said. He said that the Liberals are refusing to be transparent with Canadians, and said that by not divulging this information, it's very important because it goes against a decision of the Speaker of the House of Commons, something the government doesn't have the right to do. The Liberal government continues to provide redacted documents on the so-called green slush funds a month after they were reprimanded for doing so by the Speaker of the House of Commons. In a letter tabled in Parliament Monday, the Commons law clerk said to MPs that he had received new documents from 3 departments on SDTC. And I'll continue. I'm still referring to the article. In 3 cases, the information had not been provided. In June, 3 opposition parties, 1, 2, 3, came together to adopt a Conservative motion ordering the Public Service, the Auditor General, and SDTC to provide all the documents on this issue to the law clerk. The motion did not call for information to be held back or redacted. This motion also asked the law clerk to provide the documentation to the RCMP. The House clearly ordered the production of certain documents, and that order has clearly not been respected, as indicated in the September 27th decision. And I'll continue referring to the National Post. For this reason, the Speaker was forced to come to the conclusion that a question of privilege, a prima facie breach of privilege, had been reached, and it was suggested that the question be sent to a study for further study. So the Speaker ruled that the government had probably violated the absolute power of the House of Commons to request information. In a report published in the spring, the Auditor General concluded that one of the 6 projects funded by SDTC that she had audited was not eligible, and that the organization had major governance problems. The day the audit was published, the government announced that it was going to abolish the fund and that it would be folded into the National Research Council. And here I'll stop referring to the National Post article. So that's part of the article from October 21st, and it gives a pretty good summary of what we have been eloquently talking about in the House for the last 2 weeks.